Wow, could we time that ending of that song any better? We're at noon on the dot. Let's go ahead and get started. Bethany, did you plan that? You must have.
Oh, it's all in Pandora's hands.
Wow. Well, then we're already off to a great start. So welcome to our first virtual Friday forum. Today's content was something we were originally planning to bring to everybody on April of 2020. However, we're excited that we finally get to share it with you today. First, we're going to start with a little housekeeping. We are recording today's session, and it's going to be available on IIDA Ohio Kentucky's YouTube page. Also, if you're having any technical difficulties, please notify us in the chat and we'll try our best to help troubleshoot that issue for you. We want to give a huge thank you to our event planning committee, especially because it is their second go at planning this event. So that includes Megan, our VP of Special Events, Kristen, our VP of Professional Development, Amanda Cook and Amanda View, our Cincinnati Dayton City Center directors, Bethany Williams, our president-elect, and myself. And then next, I'd like to take a moment to thank our 2020 benefactors. So that's Platinum Benefactors Interface, Packcraft, Shaw Contract, and Tarkett. Our gold benefactors, All Steel and J&J Flooring. Silver benefactors, Alamir Hayworth, IDNA, KIHDA, Kimball, Knoll, Louisville Tile. Bronze benefactors, APCO Signs, Bruce Longino Group, Dame Binford and Associates, Dupler Office, Hampton Products, Herman Miller, King Business Interiors, Loth, Milliken, Steelcase, Technion, and Tim O'Neill and Associates. We always appreciate your guys' continued support of our organization and our profession. Today's program is IDCEC credited. Please scan the QR code on your screen now to enter your IDCEC information, or we will post a link in the chat. We'll report the course for you if you can provide us with your number, and through that you can also request a certificate of completion. We'll bring this back up at the end of the presentation as well. And then next, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, the one and only Stephanie Polen. I actually met Stephanie through my husband. Stephanie is a consultant to the company he works for, providing coaching and development. And I was looking for an energetic speaker. We wanted to focus on a professional development topic, and he told me about Stephanie. So she's definitely all that and more. After almost 20 years in high growth companies, Stephanie transitioned into the role of an entrepreneur and business owner of the Pullen Group in 2017. We're fortunate enough to have her here today to inspire and develop the leader in each and every one of us. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie and we'll get the show on the road.
Fantastic. So one of the things that we are going to get to do first, because it's Friday, is get to see everyone's faces. So for those of you that are not on screen, nobody cares what you look like. We are going to do a little bit of screen get to know who is in the room. So I'm going to read a question. And if the answer to the question is yes for you, keep your camera on. Okay. So the first question is, cameras on if you are registered to attend the annual meeting on the 20th. Cameras on if you're registered to attend. Okay, looks like we got a pretty...
need to get the link posted to register in this chat.
I know. I'm like, maybe we've got a few people that still have a to-do item left for Friday. So you can do that later. We're only going to be here for a little over an hour, so you can hang on and do that later. All right, so here's the second question. Cameras on if you washed your hair in the last 24 hours. Dry shampoo for the win. Okay. All right. If you've washed your hair in the last 24 hours. Okay. Good to know. Good to know. Glad we're all virtual. All right. So cameras on if you are missing your IIDA community and being able to be together. Love it. All the little faces. So good. So good. And then finally, actually not finally, one more. Cameras on if you wore jeans in the last week? Who actually put on jeans in the last week? I had to put on actual dress pants this week and it was not a welcome return to normal. I'll just say that. So, okay, these are the folks that wore jeans in the last week. All right, now here's the last one. Cameras on if you are ready to improve some of your leadership skills. This is where you humor the speaker and everybody turns their cameras on. Okay, good, great. Thank you guys for playing along. So, we've all spent a lot of time in front of the screen. And so what we're gonna do today is really try to keep this interactive. I expect that the chat will be really busy. I'm going to ask you a lot of things. We're going to do some polls. We're actually going to spend some time in the breakout room. So you don't have to have your camera on now. I'd love to see your face, but I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started in the presentation. If you are ready to go, then let's get started. All right, hang on one second. Come on, Bessie. All right, Friday afternoon. All right, so today what we're going to talk about is what does it mean to be unshakable. So when I work with leaders and teams, what I'm really helping people with is to understand how they are wired uniquely and how that shows up in the world. So I'll build on this idea a little bit, but that's really what this is all about. So when you have a really firm foundation of who you are, how you're wired, what you're doing, and what your purpose is in the world, then you can be unshakable in actually pursuing your goals and your dreams. So let's get started with a question in the chat. If you could have one thing right now, what would it be? It's the third Friday of the new year. If you could have one thing, what would it be? Just pop that in the chat. 2 straight days of sleep. Hey, we got sunshine today, so that's a bonus. That is a bonus. Vacation, everything back to normal, peace, amen to that. Contact with friends, money, beach trip, girls' night out. You bet. You bet. No more COVID. Amen. More time, something normal, right? So we are all in the middle of craving different things, right? And I think that as much as we want to write 2020 off as a little bit of a dumpster fire, okay, a lot of a dumpster fire, there were a lot of lessons that we learned in 2020 that can serve us really well as we head into 2021. So if you think back to about 2020, some of the things that you learned about yourself are reflected in this one thing that you want right now, right? We want to be together. We want to be in relationship. We want there to be peace. We want to be with other people. Those kinds of things their experiences last year have informed where we are today and what we really want to have happen from here. So all of this information it's good data for us, right? To say, okay, we faced a lifetime's worth of lessons last year. What lessons did I actually learn about myself? The good news is the opportunity to change it starts with you. So for example, many people I worked with last year realized that they actually worked really well by themselves. They were surprised at how well they actually worked having some quiet time. So as we head back into some version of normal as the year goes on, they're holding space for how do I keep that time where I'm by myself separate, right? How do I not go back into the rush and the busy? I've enjoyed spending time with my family. I've enjoyed being able to be in nature. I've enjoyed having time to work out and have a daily rhythm, right? As things start to change, how do we hold on to those, right? The opportunity to change that really starts with each of you, right? And making the decision to do that. And that's part of what it means to be unshakable. So here's the plan for today. We are going to talk about how to actually personally apply a lot of these concepts. We're going to talk about what holds us back from doing them in the first place. We're going to talk about really deeply the relationship between vulnerability and courage. I'm going to do some definition on that. So for all of you that got a little itchy when I said vulnerability, we'll do some definitions on that. And then we're going to actually put some plans in place to take action for what it means to actually live out being unshakable. Sound good? So far, so good? All right. So let's dive in. So when we think about being unshakable, what it really is it's based on 3 key pillars. And the first pillar is the pillar of connection. So connection means that I know how I'm wired, how I show up in the world. I know what my strengths are. I know how those strengths serve my community, how they serve my business, how they serve my family. And I know where I'm going and what I'm doing. I'm connected to my purpose and my strengths. The second pillar is community. So I know who my community is. I understand the role that they play in supporting me. I understand how I give back, and show up in my community. And then finally, courage. So this last pillar is the most important one. I don't know how many trainings you have sat in, and probably a billion webinars over the course of the last year. Everybody's got one. How many times have you actually done something with the information that you've learned? Right? So we as human beings have a general nature to jump in and try to do new things, and we're anxious to learn, but we don't actually take the step of implementing. And so we're going to talk today a little bit about courage and what it takes to actually move forward here. All right, so when you are standing confidently on the firm foundation built on your strengths, skills, and passions, that's what it means to be unshakable. When you know your role and you understand how your leadership strengths drive you, that's what it means to be unshakable. When you courageously create new opportunities for yourself and others, that's what unshakable looks like. Unshakable individuals, people who know their worth, who are on mission, create opportunities for people around them, right? So they have an abundance mindset and an intent to develop everyone who is in their sphere of influence. They don't hold tight to their role or their title. When you focus on your vision for the life that you want to create, that's what being unshakable looks like. And finally, when you build your professional and personal life in a way that works for you, moving closer to your ideal life every single day, that's what being unshakable looks like. Now, today we're going to dive in a little bit about what your vision could look like, what it actually means, and how those things can show up. Because what happens a lot of times, we get into our professional career and we've come out of a particular school or a particular certification, and there's an expectation that you're going to show up a certain way. And we don't always fit that mold. And so today we're going to talk about how do those strengths help us break the mold when we need to, and to be unshakable and founded in our own strengths. All right, so the first one is connection. So let's check in. How's everybody feeling right now? All right. So I'm going to ask this question, and I'd love for you guys to use our first polling feature. So if you go to menti.com, either in your browser or on your cell phone, and you enter in that code, just give me a word. You can give me 2, 3 words, whatever you want to do. Tell me how you're feeling right now. All right, these should be popping in here any moment. Are they not coming up on the screen? Come on. Well, hold up. I'm gonna let you guys behind the scenes because it's Friday and this is what we do. All right. Here's how everybody's feeling. So here's how everybody's feeling: hopeful, tired, stressed, hungry. Go get lunch. Come on, you can eat while we're here. It's totally fine. Good, anxious, happy it's Friday, doing all right, annoyed, all of these things, right? So we're bringing all of this into the environment today. Look, tired is really happening a lot here, okay? And we're feeling encouraged, we're feeling exhausted. I think I'm going to assign everybody a to-do to get a nap this afternoon or this weekend. Sleep fixes everything. Sleep fixes everything. So, okay, well, thanks for that anyway. It worked earlier. So let's go back to where we were. So I do that check-in primarily because we spend a lot of our day in our head and focused on the screen in front of us. And we stop paying attention to how we feel. And unshakable leaders are connected with how they feel, right? They use that as a driving force. And I'm not saying that that means that we're emotional in the way that we show up, but it does mean when I'm tired, I recognize that I need to carve out some space for myself to rest because I'm not showing up the way that I want to show up. I recognize when I'm anxious that I need to process that information either with myself or with someone else to move forward. All right. So that check-in of our feelings is something that kind of helps us stay connected to our strengths. So I want to use this definition of a leader. I don't know how many of you are in a technical leadership role, but for me, leaders don't have titles. All right. So I love this definition from Brené Brown. She says a leader is anyone who takes responsibility, for finding the potential in people and processes and has the courage to develop that potential. I love that definition, right? Because that really is anyone in any scenario that has the opportunity to do that. So that's the frame of reference that I'd like for us to kind of just keep in mind as we move forward here. When we're talking about leadership, we're not talking about title or position in an organization. We're talking about how you lead yourself and how you find potential in the people around you and have the courage to help develop that in them and in the processes that you're working into. The other word that gets thrown around a lot in leadership is authenticity, right? And so authenticity has been a really big buzzword in the leadership space for a while. And like any big buzzword, it has its pros and cons, right? So the pro is that being authentic is a way for us to keep our humanness at the forefront of who we are as individuals at work. You guys probably have experienced that over the last year, right? We've seen people's kids and dogs and the UPS guy that stopped by, right? So we've run into a lot more authentic scenarios than we probably ever did before. And you know what? I hope we don't go back to that, right? I hope we don't go back to having fake profiles and having this always buttoned up 110% of the time need to show up in the world. I hope that we stay in this authenticity. But authenticity is a conscious choice, right? It is a conscious choice for how we show up every single day. And it's a collection of those choices, right? So it is understanding that if you want to make a choice to be open and transparent with people around you, that you don't do it with just certain people, right? That you don't show up one way over here and another way in another scenario. It's a collection of choices that you're going to make every day to be who you are. It's also about being real, being honest, and being seen. So if you guys can't tell, I love me some Brené Brown. I'm going to highly recommend her at all scenarios. So this won't be the last time you hear from her today. But if you are interested in doing some more leadership development and really kind of working on how to tap into the things that are unique to you, I recommend any and all of her books. So, but I really specifically love the work that she does around leadership in this definition. So let me ask, how many of you guys have ever done any kind of a personality profile before? In the chat, just tell me which ones you've done. Strength Finders, Myers-Briggs, DISC. Those are the popular ones. Enneagram, oh yeah, Enneagram. Predictive Index. Exactly. And we love those things, right? Like we love to know more about ourselves. So they are really popular. We've all taken the quiz of, which Disney character are you most like? And, like we get pulled into those kinds of things because we want to know more about ourselves. Now, I don't know how many of you could cite to me what your DISC was, what your Myers-Briggs was, what your Enneagram number is. But a lot of times we do those and then we put them on a shelf, right? We're like, oh, that was really fun. It was really interesting. And we put them on a shelf. So I'm going to help you get to know me by way of introduction by using my personality profiles. So one of the personality profiles that I work with is called emergenetics. So if you looked at my emergenetics profile, this would tell you a little bit about how I think and how I behave. Those of you that were into Myers-Briggs, this is our translation point. I'm an ENTJ for those Myers-Briggsers out there. If you're DISC, I was a high D. If you don't know DISC, it means dominant, high D. Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 8 with a 7 wing. Might be speaking a foreign language to some of you, but that's what it means in Enneagram. And strength finders. So these are my top 5: strategic, achiever, connected, arranger, responsibility. So here's a question. So what? Right? So what? So this is a great amount of information about me. And if you know one of these profiles, it tells you a little bit more about me than what you already knew, but it doesn't tell you the whole story about who I am, right? So any and all of your profiles also don't tell the full story about who you are and how you show up. What I've had to learn over time is how to take the components of these different pieces of information and tell a story about how I can add value and how I lead and how I show up. All right. So an example here. I know that when I am in a team, if I look at my strength finders, because that looks like that was a lot of us had strength finders experience, I can tell you that when I'm in a team, I know that I show up as someone who tries to get us to the big picture, tries to set goals that we're going to achieve together as a team, tries to keep everybody connected and on the same page about that vision. Then I'm going to arrange who's going to work on what, and then I'm going to hold you accountable for actually doing it. So I can actually use that to describe how I'm going to show up in a team. The most helpful part of it was me actually processing that myself so that I could articulate it, right? So when people would bring me into different things, I would be able to say, hey, you know what? I know that I'm a high D, which is dominant in DISC. And that means that sometimes I can take over a conversation. So if I'm taking over the conversation, I want you to know that it's okay for you to tell me that I'm taking it over. Right. So that's an open door conversation, right? I also know, hey, you know what? I'm an Enneagram 8, which means I'm a challenger. So you should know when you're working with me, I'm going to ask you a ton of questions, right? I'm going to push you on things because that's how I show up. If it makes you uncomfortable, let me know. Right. So I can articulate now how I show up in relationship with people, how I lead, what I can bring to a team, and the value that I can add. So when we know our strengths, then we can actually put them in action. And that's what it's really all about. So if you have a profile in a drawer somewhere, go dust it off, take a review of it, and then think about, like, how would you tell somebody what that profile tells you? Like, how do you actually show up in relationship to someone else? All right. And here's why. This level of self-awareness is absolutely critical for leaders. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand because I know we've all worked for people that are not self-aware. All right. And when someone is not self-aware, it is painful for everyone else who works for them. Right. We've worked for the individual who doesn't know when to stop talking. We've worked for the individual that doesn't talk enough, right? So that self-awareness is really important, being able to know both your strengths and the things that can hold you back. So here's why. So in the research, men and women rate themselves similarly on our level of emotional intelligence, right? So when someone would ask us, we would rate ourselves generally similarly, okay? Meaning we understand where we are in the scheme of things. But in the study, what we found was that 19% of women executives that were interviewed exhibited self-awareness, right? So it meant that they were having active conversations about, I know that I'm a strong communicator, and here's how it serves the team, and here's how sometimes it gets in my way. They were self-aware enough to know where they needed to work. They were self-aware enough to know with the value that they bring to a team. So 19% of women that were interviewed exhibited this level of self-awareness, compared to 4% of our male counterparts. Now, this is not a bash on men, guys. in the room, I see you. We don't do male bashing when we talk about these two things, right? They are differences in the way that we are wired. And here's why that's important. Because when you take it one level deeper, this is where things start to fall apart between the two. When we ask women to predict how their boss would rate them on that level of emotional intelligence, women were 3 times lower than men. So they would say, okay, well, I think I'm this, but I think my boss is going to say that I'm this, right? So the gap is really big. So we might think that we've got a really high level of emotional intelligence. Maybe the data proves out that we do, but we think that other people think that we don't. Okay. So that is true across both sexes. All right. So this is a study for women. I'll tell you, I coach a ton of men. I work with a ton of men leaders. Men have the same problem. All right. So I'm not trying to debunk my study, but men have the same problem, right? This is where the disconnect happens when you really want to step into your role as a leader. So knowing what your strengths are, being really aware about them helps you actually put them in action. And that's what we're all about. So if you could use one word to describe yourself, what would it be? Put that in the chat. Let's own that. Let's practice this a little bit. One word to describe yourself. Caring, listener, energetic, friendly, kind, comical, open, empathetic, thoughtful. Love it. Keep them coming. Kind, extroverted, fun, cheerleader. Amazing. So how does that help your team? How does that help you in your career? Was it hard to answer that question? Maybe a little bit. Because this is what happens, right? Is we can come up with a label, we come up with one word, but if we can't tell the story for how it helps, then we're not helping ourselves. So Jackie, for example, said that she's a cheerleader, right? Rebecca's inspirational. I'm sure there's a story behind both of those of how they've showed up in their organizations, with their clients, with their teams, bringing the value of that to the business, right? And to the work that they're doing in the world. So if it took you a heartbeat to think of a word, then maybe there's some work to do here, right? Because we want to be plugged in to those strengths and to be able to show how they actually show up. All right. So when we can't do that, here's what we do instead. So we often prove, perfect, perform, and please. Okay. So if we are not self-aware, if we're not confident in who we are, here's how it shows up. We work to prove ourselves to others. That might be anything from getting another degree, getting another certification. Anybody else a certification junkie? Like self-confessed, like I want a certification for everything, right? So we work to prove ourselves, right? We want the biggest project. We want the next thing. We want to be in the next meeting. We're trying to prove. Or we try to perfect, right? We just keep iterating on things over and over and over and over again to perfect them. Sometimes we perform. So if we are not self-aware about our own strengths, we show up in performing for the people around us. Do you expect that somebody in my role is really outgoing? Fine, I'll be outgoing for you. Do you expect that somebody in my role is really quiet and reserved? Fine, I'll show up as quiet and reserved. Right? It's performing when we're adapting those behaviors to someone else's expectation. And then finally, we try to please everybody. And we all know that's a no-win situation, right? Nobody's going to be happy all the time ever. And what that is that's us hustling for our worthiness. And here's the deal. No one has to hustle for your worthiness, all right? Everybody sitting here today is worthy just as you are, for the respect that you deserve and the love that you deserve in this world, right? So no hustling, no performing, no pleasing, no proving. That is not the way to be an unshakable leader. So here's why we care. Let's be honest, right? Because we all struggle with this. There's actually some science behind why we care. And this is another book I would recommend, Playing Big by Tara Moore. So I would recommend her book also. We care a lot about what other people think because we have a relational focus, right? We are designed as human beings to be in relationship with other people. So if we don't fit the mold, it goes back to some of our old science of we could be kicked out of the tribe. Nobody wants to be kicked out of the tribe, right? We all want to be in good relationship and good standing. So it is hardwired for us to be in relationship. So that's part of the reason we care what other people think about us. We also have a heightened awareness of others' reactions, again, because of the fear of being kicked out of the tribe. That shows up in our corporate environment. And if anybody else has had the experience of sitting in a meeting and someone more senior or a client has pushed back on something or has had a negative reaction, like you can feel the adrenaline and the sweat starting to happen, right? So we're aware of those reactions because we don't want to be kicked out of the tribe. Okay, so it's a physiological thing. For women in particular, there's a history of survival through likability and social influence. Not only for women, but particularly for women. So the more you would go along to get along, back to our genealogy, the more likable you were, the more likely you were to find a mate, which meant the more likely you were to be safe and to be fed. Okay, so it's all hardwired back there. We have a fear of personal attacks. Yes. There's a cultural focus on girls' and women's appearance more than men's, although I see that changing, kind of some reverse discrimination sometimes on that as well. But that focus on appearance is part of why we care what other people think, right? And then finally, some good girl conditioning. So I'm not going to ask you guys to raise your hands on this one, but good girl conditioning and good boy conditioning also is that process of, I just don't want to make any waves, right? I want to be the good girl. I don't want to stand out. I don't want to be threatened. I'm just going to do what you ask me to do. And while that's a good survival technique, it is not a good leadership technique. It is not a good personal development technique because you're stuffing down who you really are in service of someone else's expectations, right? And that's not what being unshakable looks like. Okay, so let's take a quick poll. Megan, are you ready? So, question for you about what's holding you back. So, the answer is imposter syndrome. Okay, but it shows up in a lot of different ways. So, Megan, if you want to launch that poll, you guys answer as many of these as are statements that you have thought before. What are the things that are holding you back? Click as many as you want to answer. Things that you've thought. Here they come. I've got a good chunk. Maybe just give a couple more seconds to let people come in. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the polling and share the results. All right, can everybody see the results in here? All right. Oh, you need more experience. You need more experience. So look at all of these. All right. Everybody probably showed up in multiple places. All right. You are not alone in thinking these thoughts that hold you back. All right. So let's deal with you need more experience for just a minute. When you believe that, what do you do? That you need more experience. You probably go for another certification, try to prove something to somebody, right? You maybe take another project so you can do it again just a little bit better than you did last time to perfect something, right? Or you're waiting to raise your hand for an opportunity, right? When we are thinking about the fact that we need more experience, we are holding ourselves back. right? So you can read every book, you can go to every seminar, every webinar in the whole wide world that you want to, but when are you going to raise your hand? When are you going to raise your hand? Here's what I see with leaders, men and women. We take ourselves out of the equation far more often than anyone else would take us out of the equation. And when you tell yourself that you need more experience, you're opting out of the opportunity, right? Even if you think you need more experience, even if maybe you even know that you do, right? You don't have the qualifications quite, but maybe you know, ask, right? If you were to ask for the opportunity, chances are good your leader, the owner of your firm, your client is going to say, look, actually, I'm looking for someone that can do this, right? And then you can have a conversation about, well, I have this kind of experience, or how would you do that? Or how would we think about that? Or what can I do, right? Then it opens up a conversation that they know that you're interested in doing it. Don't take yourself out of the equation. Get yourself into it, right? It goes very hand in hand with you're not ready. So that's another one up here. So, 57% of the group is saying, you're not ready. These are your decisions, right? These are your decisions saying that you're not ready. That you don't have enough experience. Most of the time, those are not fact-based, okay? So it does take some courage to stick it out there and have somebody prove that to you, all right? But once they prove it to you, and once somebody would give you that feedback, then you can go do something about it, right? So I work with people all the time that really want to take that next opportunity. And I ask them, well, who knows that you want to do that, right? Who knows that you want to be the leader of the team, or who knows that you want to shift client load and go try to work with that kind of client? Well, nobody knows that. Okay, so if nobody knows that you want to go do those things or have that experience, how do you think you're going to get those things coming your way? People are not mind readers, all right? So knowing what it is that holds you back, knowing what those talk tracks are really, really important as you grow as a leader, right? They all definitely add up, right? So these are some of the worst hit list. But as you can see, everybody else, there's not one of those that only had one person in it, right? Other people think the same things. All right, this is why it's important. This consciousness is observing your thoughts and actions so that you can live from that choice in the moment rather than being run from programming in the past. All right, I need more experience, I'm not ready, I need to lose 10 pounds, like whatever that is, that's past programming. That's past programming. And it is wired and it drives your subconscious more than you realize. I read a stat recently. I'm a big neuroscience geek. And the stat was that we spend 93% of our time in our subconscious. So 93% of the time, this old programming is running what we're doing every single day. 93%. Right? So if you can't recognize that that is a thought that's holding you back, how are you going to change it? Right? So being conscious about those things that come up mean that you can then reframe them, right? You can look at that and say, all right, maybe I do need more experience, but the way for me to get that experience is by, subcontracting over here or being a part of a team that's trying this. Right? So it gives us a chance to reframe and actually move forward. All right. Now, who's going to hold us accountable? Our community is going to hold us accountable. So as you're thinking about what are those things that hold you back, tell somebody. All right. Be working with someone, whether it's your leader, whether it's a coworker, whether it's a friend of yours, and say, look, I know that I struggle with always feeling like I need more experience. If you hear me talking like that, will you call me on it? Like, will you bust me on that? Who are your people? So community is really important, and understanding who is in your circle is an exercise worthy of spending some time with. So for example, who is around you? Who are some people that you need to have in your life to be successful as you grow in your career and as a leader? In your life, you need someone who can find toilet paper. Remember back in the day, like last March, Who is the friend that could find the toilet paper? You know, there was one, right, who was texting people that it's in Staples at the back, right? There was always somebody, right? We need somebody that is a utility player like that. We need somebody that we can call when we're stuck and they can go pick up our kids or our dog, all right? Someone who's going to bring us dinner when we're sick. Someone that will actually let into our house when it's dirty. Okay. Who are these people? Who are the ones that are going to tell you the truth, that'll encourage you, that'll challenge you professionally and personally, and the one who's always in your corner, right? The one who's always going to encourage you. One of the things that I learned last year, just in working with people, is there were, and you guys might have experienced this too, is, we had a lot of relationships. But the ones that actually mean something, the ones that were actually real, are the ones that showed up last year. It's the one that was there to encourage you. It was the one that was telling you where the stash of toilet paper is. So those were the people. Those are your people, right? So what did you learn about your community last year? Were there areas that you didn't have someone who was there encouraging you, and you were the one having to encourage everybody else? I mean, what are the areas, what are the things that you learned last year about your relationships and your community that could be something for you to work on this year? All of those things are in service of helping to move us forward. So they're important. Community and these relationships are important, and so are boundaries. All right. So we're gonna have a little primer on boundaries here, because when we don't have boundaries, things really slip. And usually when I talk about boundaries, people think that it's a hard yes or no, right? That these are things that are black and white. But really what they are is understanding what are the limits that we have in our relationships. And this includes not just your relationships, work relationships, family relationships, but also your relationship with your work, right? With the way that you show up in the world. So when you don't have boundaries, you don't make time for a bathroom break, right? I'm working too hard, too many commitments, bouncing back and forth between work and personal all day long. I'm in quality time with my partner. Daily schedule changes are happening. The kids' stuff is in my office space. Those are all examples of not having strong boundaries, right? And we might think it's okay, like, oh, we can make it work. We'll just make it work. We're 10 months into this now, almost 12 months into this pandemic and this environment. I had a conversation with someone in December. She was working on the end table in her guest bedroom as her desk. I'm like, okay, buy a desk, get a table. She's like, well, I can make it work, right? I can make it work. And we do this all the time. We try to make it work. I'm like, get a real table. Have Santa bring you one, okay? Because we can't work off of the end table anymore. But we just are making things work, and we're not creating the boundaries we need to do our work well, all right? And that's what that looks like. So healthy boundaries are really important because it's important for our mental health, first of all. It affects how we influence others. It helps us avoid burnout. We know who we are. We know what we're about when we have boundaries. So setting a boundary, for example, that says, I am going to actually unplug from work at a certain time of the day, right? We all have experienced it. This is the biggest leaky boundary of the work from home, is we're always on. Heck, your laptop might be on your kitchen table, right? So it's easy. It's right there. And I'm just one email, right? Like it's just one email. I'm just gonna hang on. Just one more thing, right? And we're never actually unplugged. All right. So setting a boundary that says, when I say I'm done, is really important for our mental health. Right. So that's just one example of where a boundary can show up. And if you're not sure where maybe you need some help in setting some boundaries or thinking about where that is, think about, what are the things that you're tolerating? Like my friend on the end table. Okay. She's tolerating that. What are the things that you're resentful about? Right. Maybe you're resentful that I got to make dinner every dang night. Right. Maybe we're resentful about that. So that might be an area where we need to set a boundary and say, you know what? I'm not making dinner every night. We're going to eat out at least twice a week, or I'm going to get a meal delivery, or we're just naming it instead of having to deal with it every single moment, right? What are the things you're resenting? Where are you being passive aggressive? All right, where are those kinds of things showing up? Those are indicators of where you need some boundaries. And so here's what it looks like when you have those. So if we use I'll just use the meal prep example. If we've decided that we don't want to have to be responsible for dinner every single night, that's the boundary, right? The boundary is, maybe I primarily own this responsibility in our household, but I can't do it every night. All right. So you say to someone else in your household, look, I need you to take care of this like a couple of nights a week. Can you do it on Mondays and Tuesdays? Because those are really busy for us. I don't care if we eat out. I don't care if we make spaghetti. I need to not be responsible for this every single night. Don't have to over explain it. You don't have to explain why, because it stresses you out or what's going on. Don't over explain it. And then hold that boundary, right? Set consequences. Look, if you don't take responsibility for it, we're not going to have dinner. And then somebody's going to have to drive to Chick-fil-A, right? So whatever the situation is, setting what those consequences are is also really important. So we're going to get ready to dive into some breakout rooms. And before we do that, I'm going to give you 4 areas to think about maybe where you need some boundaries. And then we're going to share this slide in the chat room for you to access, but let me talk about them first. So one big area around boundaries is protecting your time. So when you think about that area where you're resenting things, right? So sometimes that resentment shows up in, maybe you don't have enough time to spend any time in the morning working out. Maybe you don't have time to journal or do any study in the morning that you need to do. Maybe you don't have time to even have a cup of coffee by yourself. You're sucking it down as you're getting people in different directions, right? Protecting your time is one boundary. And these are some questions to think about in that space. Another one is around conversations. All right. This is particularly important these days. So which topics make you uncomfortable? If you don't want to talk about politics with people, don't talk about politics with people. It's just that simple, right? But we get into these conversations, we get pulled into topics that we're really uncomfortable about because we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, right? So we put ourselves in these scenarios where we've said, fine, I'll talk about politics, but I'll try to keep it nice. You can just say, hey, that's not what we're here for right now. All right. This is what we're after. Those are the kinds of things to be thinking about in terms of boundaries around conversations. What kinds of things do you want to talk about or not be talking about on the regular basis? Boundaries around your personal space. So if you could have a little corner of your house that was just for you, what would it look like? I know that's a dangerous question for this group. You guys could be off for days designing things. So just limit that one. But what are some meaningful things that you would want to have in that space, right? So because we are spending so much time in our homes, and maybe you guys are guilty of this too, we've just let a lot of things go, right? It goes back to that making it work, or we've got things stacked up, or we didn't carve out a space. Think about that. We need a boundary for our personal space and where we're working and also in our homes. And then finally, put some boundaries around the things that you can't control. All right. So we all learned the lesson last year that we are not in control of an awful lot of things. Maybe we believed we were before that, but last year we proved that we were not. So how do we put some boundaries around the things that we cannot control and focus on what we actually can, right? How do we ground ourselves back on what can I control? These are the things I should not be worried about because I can only control these things. All right. So these are 4 areas. I'd love it if you would just kind of take a look at this and think about where you maybe need to create some boundaries. I'm going to send you into the breakout rooms. You guys are going to be in there for about 15 minutes. Recommend that you would make sure and introduce yourselves really quickly if you don't already know everybody in the room. And then just talk about this, like, where do you have good boundaries, right? Can you set an example? Can you share where you've done some things that have worked? Or where are some areas that you need to develop better boundaries, all right, in this area or anything else, what you can control, conversations, personal space, your time. Where do you actually need to create some of these boundaries so you can do what you need to do to be successful? All right. Okay, Megan, are you ready to send everybody into the breakouts? All right, the link is in the chat. You'll still see it when you go into the breakouts. You'll be there for 15 minutes and then it will automatically suck you back. So there's nothing else that you have to do. You'll get a notification and it'll pull you right back in to the main room. All right, so I think some of you probably had access, so I'm super curious. Can you kind of give me some aha moments that happened in that breakout session as you talked about boundaries and maybe where you needed to create them? Just take yourself off mute and jump in.
In our breakout session, one of our people in the breakout session said we need to control our thoughts. And as we were talking about this, I thought that was a very good point because I think a lot of us are planners and we probably all dive down rabbit holes inside of our brains, especially now that we're trapped inside of our houses. I thought that was a very smart point.
Yes. Did you guys talk about how to control those thoughts or how to keep track of them?
We didn't quite figure that out, but we did decide that we needed to create boundaries. We decided we
Anybody
needed
got any
to
tips
create
for that?
boundaries for ourselves.
Perfect. We'll take that as a win. And the answer to that is journaling, if anybody needs that. Keeping track of that on a regular basis. I'm a huge proponent of journaling and all of its shapes and forms, and that helps us kind of keep track of where our head is on a regular basis. What else did you guys learn?
Well,
Or what happened
journaling
in
is a
the
good way to
breakout program?
offload, right?
For sure. For sure. Do you have a good practice of that, Mark?
I do not, but I aspire to.
Yeah.
But back on the controlling your thoughts thing. I mean, there's so much going on in the world.
Yep.
We talked about you got to take a deep breath and just realize what you cannot control, and just say a prayer, or whatever. But you just can't keep going down that same rabbit hole about everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, social media boundaries maybe should have been our example on all of that. I don't know about you guys, but that is an area I have had to set some boundaries, and I've broken my boundaries and had to go back and reset some boundaries on that, for sure. For sure.
Yeah,
What
the
else? What are
social
some other
media
areas?
one came up in ours and talked about like the time limits, how you can put time limits on each of your apps
Yeah.
to force that boundary upon yourself.
I love that. So don't do what I do, because I get the limit notification in Facebook, and then I go to Twitter, and then kind of not the point. So anyway, so don't overwork the system. What else?
We talked about that besides setting up some boundaries and saying no, but also this past 9 months has allowed us to also be more open. So people are working in the evenings or at different times, so you're more open to be in contact with them, just because we're all trying to get this together, where previously I might not have answered an email, in the evening, or but that is something that has definitely changed. If we need to get on a call at 9:30 at night and talk about something, then let's do it, So a lot of people are more open to that.
Good. That's a good one. Any other ahas? No. All right. Well, we're going to keep going then. Let me go back and share my screen and talk about, so what do we do with this? Okay. So we had a great, hopefully, discussion about boundaries, but now what, right? So it's wonderful to talk about, like I did, social media boundaries, but then we actually have to hold the boundaries. Anybody remember the Seinfeld episode of like taking the reservation, holding? Okay, nobody else is laughing. All right. So that was a really good Seinfeld episode, just saying. But we have to have the courage to actually follow through when we have these boundary ideas. And it is because we all have within us different leadership traits, right? And so some of the best leadership traits are things like resilience, which we've all had to learn, trust, recognition, giving feedback. Like all of these things are really strong leadership traits. And they all have one thing in common. and that is vulnerability. All right, so each of these actions require vulnerability in order for it to be true. So think about it this way. If you need to give feedback to someone, it's a vulnerable situation to give feedback to someone, particularly if it's negative, because you don't want it to land the wrong way, right? So you have to be vulnerable in approaching it and doing it in ability and because an idea might not work, right? You might propose something and the project just doesn't come together. It just doesn't actually work. There's vulnerability in actually
Hey, Stephanie, will you try turning off your camera?
require vulnerability. That's the foundation. Oh, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, I can now. Yeah.
Okay, we go back. We started to hear the piece on vulnerability. We got the example about giving feedback.
Oh, but then it froze.
Froze.
Shoot. Okay. Vulnerability is the foundation of all of these things. So it isn't giving feedback because we might miss a relationship. We might make somebody upset with us. Vulnerability is also the foundation when it comes to innovation. So when we propose a new idea, it might not work. So there's vulnerability required to do that. Vulnerability is required in creativity, right? So it is a vulnerable experience to put a design in front of someone and see if they like it, right? Or do they make the face, or is it okay? So vulnerability is the foundation of a lot of things when it comes to being a really good leader. And the person who speaks the best about that is Brene. And so I'm gonna let you listen to this just 2-minute video. She sets up the relationship between vulnerability and courage. I was going to. All right, Megan and I just tested this, didn't we?
Yeah, I can validate. It did start and work.
Darn it. Hold up. Hang on, guys. You know what? My like me today. She's really good. I can't say it as good as she does. And so I really do want you to actually hear it. Hang on one second. I'm going to try it from here. Go, Brene. Go, Brene. Okay, so here's what Brene said about vulnerability and courage. So, because it's Friday afternoon and we're just going to move forward. These two ideas, what she is really about is her research is really founded on a lot of the things that like they do in the military, for example. So that's probably one of the things that connects with me about her is that her work is really research based. So when we talk about vulnerability, particularly in the workplace, people can get a little nervous about the idea, right? Because we have traditionally thought of vulnerability as somebody crying in their office, right? Vulnerability is not about crying in your office or in someone else's office, although it happens. But vulnerability is like in those ideal leadership traits, it is the example of moving forward with creativity, moving forward with innovation. It is connected to courage, right? So you can't get to courage without going through vulnerability. And she studied that even in the military. And it was really interesting. So I actually taught this idea to a Xavier University MBA class a while back. We had a couple guys in there that were SEAL team and had graduated and they were coming back to get their MBA. So I was nervous to present vulnerability to guys on the SEAL team. And what we talked about was this idea that you can't get to courage without going through vulnerability. And they said, absolutely, Steph. They backed up what Brene had in her research. You have to put yourself in a vulnerable situation for the people on the team in order for the courageous act to happen, right? So you guys think about the work that you're doing. You have to be vulnerable in preparing design and preparing the work that you're doing and putting it in front of a client or putting it in front of your boss, it's a vulnerable experience to do that. And then you get the reinforcement, which brings the courage to come through. And you're like, okay, I did that once, I can do it again. All right. But you have to be vulnerable in the first place to connect the dots. So when we think about all of the things we've been talking about today, we have to be vulnerable and saying, you know what, actually, I need to have a conversation with someone about boundaries, right? Like, I'm not doing a great job with that. And now I need to talk to somebody and set this boundary so that I can move forward with the things that I need to be successful. So it is required to be vulnerable in order to be courageous. And our society likes to jump straight to the courage side of things, right? We can't get there unless there's some risk involved. So there are some myths about vulnerability. You know, I don't know how many of these you agree with. I needed to unlearn a number of them. Okay. So the fact that vulnerability is in and of itself a weakness is an absolute myth, right? The people who are the most vulnerable also become great leaders, right? Because it brings their humanity into the situation. A myth that I don't do vulnerability. Yes, you do. So we all have to be vulnerable in all different kinds of scenarios. All of these things are myths that we hold about being vulnerable, and we hold that back because we think it's not something that's important to standing up as a leader, but it actually is one of the foundational elements of being a good leader, is being vulnerable. And here's what it looks like in practical action, okay? It looks like any number of these phrases, okay? So vulnerability in the workplace looks like saying, I don't know. It is that simple, all right? When we don't have vulnerability in the workplace, you have a lot of people who act like they know everything because it's not safe for them not to know everything, all right? So in a workplace scenario, saying, I don't know, is a way to open up some vulnerability, right? Saying, that's not my experience, instead of you're wrong, right? Is a way to open up the conversation. Help me understand is another one that I hear used a lot really successfully. Or tell me why this doesn't work for you. All of those things, all of those little phrases say, I want to be in a relationship and I want to have a conversation with you, right? It's not a, I know everything, I'm the expert, I have it all figured out. It says, I know something, but I also respect that you know something too, right? So let's talk about what that is. And that's what vulnerability in the workplace looks like, right? It's not somebody crying in your office about, or it's not somebody telling you all the things they've ever done bad in their whole life, right? Nobody cares you stole the Snicker bar when you were 5, okay? So there's no place for that here, right? But there is a place for saying, I don't know, or tell me, like, I'm curious, like, why would you think that? That's what vulnerability in the workplace looks like. It's just that simple. And it's important because that's what daring leadership looks like. We talked about authenticity at the beginning, and really authentic leadership is vulnerable. And it shows up as daring leadership, right? These are the people that take risks. These are the people that bring people along with them. These are the people that will hold others up in the light of day instead of being the one that takes all the credit. And what we need in this environment are more brave leaders and more courageous cultures. So it sounds like a great place to work if you had a bunch of people who were courageous, authentic leaders, for sure. So we can model the way in doing that. And so let's take a little bit of action. So courage is also about action. So I'm going to leave you with a few things to be thinking about. And the first one is to do a quick Unshakable health check. All right. So how are you doing in all of these areas of connection, community, courage? So there were a few assignments kind of as we went through there, between boundaries and who's in your circle. So spend some time thinking about what the answers are to those questions. I'm going to encourage you to go back to your strengths, right? So pull out a profile, go take one. Call me if you need one to do. I've got some I can send you. But reconnect to those strengths, especially at the beginning of the year. It's a good time for reflection and planning. Why wouldn't you start with something that comes naturally to you, right? If you're naturally wired to be someone who thinks analytically, then let's start there, right? So using those strengths to actually move forward is really what we want to do, because that's going to be the easiest, most high impact way to move forward. So do that. And then get a journal. This was coming. I teased it earlier. Get a journal. Don't overcomplicate it. All right. So this does not have to be a diatribe. We're not writing the great American novel when you get one. You know, if you start simply with 3 things that I'm grateful for, that's a great place to start. All right. And then the rest of it is stream of consciousness, right? Just set yourself 3 things you're grateful for. So for me, I do better holding to that at night. So I have a journal next to my bed, and before I go to sleep, 3 things I'm grateful for, right? And if it started out grateful for my house, I'm grateful for my family, okay? But as you do it more and more, you start to notice things, right? So like last week, I wrote that I was grateful that my son, who's 11, still wants me to wake him up in the morning. Right? He's not too big for that. So I'm grateful that he still wants mom to wake him up in the morning. And you start to notice these little things over time, and that gratitude is really where it starts. I do have an example for you. So this is something I use too. I call it 3-2-1 flow. And the idea is simply in the morning to think about, 3 words that describe how you want to feel that day, right? So tapping back into not what do I have to do, but how do I want to feel today? I can choose if I want to feel happy, if I want to feel calm, if I want to feel energized. I can make those choices early in the morning for how I want to show up for the rest of the day. So 3 words that describe how I want to feel for the day. 2 things I want to get done, only 2, right? The list is probably longer, but what are the 2 that absolutely have to happen? And 1 intention for the day. So intentions are not goals. Intentions are how you want to approach the day. So you might, for example, set an intention that says, today I am curious, right? So I'm going to participate in all of my meetings today being curious. I'm going to exhibit what that behavior looks like. Or my intention is to be someone who brings light today, right? So I'm going to show up in that way with everybody that I'm around. Just that simple, 3, 2, 1, to think about it that way, right? So that's a good one to get started with. The other thing I would encourage you to do is to elevate your environment. All right, you guys will probably love this. Seems to be right in your wheelhouse with this audience. And what I would encourage in this is to upgrade the office. All right, so back to my end table example. She did get a desk, by the way, but back to that end table example. But what is around you that needs to move? All right, I know you guys are in this business. You pay attention to this more than most. But what has been sitting around you and you don't even see it anymore, right? What do you need to change? Where are the things that bring you joy, that light you up, that encourage you? Are they visible? Are they where you can see them, right? Do you need to upgrade your chair? Right? Some people still sitting in folding chairs. Like, seriously, upgrade the office. Get comfortable, all right? So get the big snuggly blanket. Do what you need to do to be comfortable in your environment, both in your work environment and at home. Buy the good coffee. All right. So if we're not at our normal coffee shops, no reason we need to be drinking Folgers. Okay. Unless you love Folgers, and then please drink it. But invest in the good coffee. All right. We are at home. This is what we're doing. These little luxuries add up. I'm going to encourage you to get creative, right? So in whatever way that looks for you, if that is music, if that's art, if that's writing, whatever that is, do it just once or twice a week. All right. Change your scenery. So get outside. I know it's cold. That's what we have jackets for. Get outside, change your scenery, move your desk, take your laptop somewhere else for a couple of hours in the day. Find a new playlist. All right. So I love to trade playlists with people. So if you've got one, let me know. But find a new playlist. And these kinds of things happening in the background, all of it helps keep us moving forward, keeps us tapped into what's going on around us. And all of that's really important, right? So as we become better leaders, we're more connected with who we are. And all of these little teeny tiny things, they add up just as much as the big one. All right. So I'm going to be mindful of our time together. I'm going to skip that poll because that didn't work the first time. We're not going to try that again. But do know that courage is contagious. So when you do these things, tell other people that you did them. All right. When you have a conversation with someone about boundaries, talk to somebody who is in your breakout room and be like, hey, you know that thing we talked about? I totally did that. Right. I totally was working on my thought work here. I did this on social media. Follow up. You guys are connected. Follow up and say, hey, I did this. Right. And these little tiny things all add up, and that courage is quite contagious. All right, I'm gonna leave some time for a Q&A. If you love to talk about this stuff some more, if you wanna talk about building a vision for this year, one of the things that I have coming up even next week is a virtual retreat where we're going through this kind of work, and I'd love to have you. And then finally, we're gonna continue these conversations throughout the year this year in the Unshakable Women Collective. Sorry, guys, this one's just for the ladies in this collective, but more leadership training here to come. So what questions do you have? I'm loving looking at the chat. Everybody needs to move the toys. I think that that's a collective. Move the toys and take a nap this weekend. I think those are like the two big things it seems like we need to do.
But Stephanie, actually, Robin had asked about if you had any good book suggestions on vulnerability in the workplace and leadership. So I don't know if you want to go ahead and answer that one.
Yeah, for sure. So I see Dare to Lead is in there. That's a great one. The other one I'm looking that I like, hang on a second, is this one is called 9 Lies About Work. Hannah, this is probably familiar to you. This is also a great way to think about the way that we show up in the work environment and ways to do that differently. I love that one. There are a number of really good ones. Tara Moore's work, I think I cited in one of them, Playing Big, is another great one. It's all about how we can really own our strengths and own what we're doing. So I would highly recommend any of those. But Brene is definitely the place to start on the vulnerability. The Gift of Imperfection of hers is a really good place to start. Dare to Lead is wonderful. Dare to Lead pulls together the big concepts from all of her work. So it's kind of a big summary leadership focused one too.
I have a question, and I guess it's similarly related to the vulnerability. How do you balance the vulnerability sort of tools that you listed with making sure that you are properly heard? Because I know that we talked a little bit about the differences between men and women in the workplace, and that is something that often comes up with women making sure that they're heard. Because some of the things that you listed could maybe sound as if you're not confident in what you're saying.
Understand. You know, my biggest recommendation is to be intentional about how you want to show up, right? So when you think about a meeting where you want to maybe test some of these things out, how do you want to show up? What do you want to have happen, right? We are on autopilot most of the time. Have the meeting, I'm going to show up in the meeting, I'm going to leave and do some things. If you wrote down, these are 3 things that I want to accomplish in this meeting, or these are 3 outcomes that I want to have happen in the meeting. I do that. I put on a Post-it note next to my laptop when I'm on screen with someone and say, these are the 3 things that I have to get through, so that when I try those new things, I'm doing it in service of the 3 objectives that I want to accomplish in that meeting, right? But like I said, we're just on autopilot so often. If you think about, you wanted to accomplish an objective on this, and it was maybe to learn something more about the project or to ask a question, and you said, that wasn't my experience, right? If you tried that one out with somebody, you're doing it in service of that objective, and it comes across as though you're focused because your mind's eye is on that, right? Rather than willy-nilly being like, I don't know, right? You're bringing it forward in service of an objective that you have already decided you want to accomplish in that meeting. That I think the tone on that is very different. And a lot of times if we just show up and we're like, I'm just going to try this, it could come off that way. Does that help or not?
Yes, it does. I think the objectives and making sure that you're working towards those, that definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Anytime you're trying something new like that, that's the way to do it, right? And that's one of those tips that I give people when I'm coaching. When you're trying to reframe or reset how somebody views you, be intentional about the point that you want to make. All right. Instead of just showing up and being in a relationship with them, what do you want to be different? What do you need to do differently or say differently in this meeting to show up differently to them? being intentional about it for sure.
I think that kind of leads, one of the things that I know I struggle with is sometimes I try very confidently and calmly to set boundaries with people and they react in not such a great way.
Yeah.
Do you just tell them? Do you explain to them like, look, I'm trying to set boundaries? I mean, like, what do you do after somebody comes back and you've been as calm and collected as you can and they just are not accepting your boundaries?
Yeah. I wish I had this meme handy, but the short of the meme is that's their problem. So, right. So a lot of times when we try to set boundaries, it's inconvenient for the person on the other side of that boundary. All right. It is inconvenient for someone if they expect you to be online all the time and you're telling them that you're not going to do that. All right. So there are scenarios where someone is going to react to that. That's why knowing that that boundary is important to you and why that boundary is important to you. So if I just use that example, that boundary might be important because I actually want to sit down and have dinner with my family. All right. And I also actually really need to get good sleep because I'm turning really cranky. And so that means that I need to be off at a certain time. So if you know the why for that, then you can have a conversation to say, well, what do you need from me? Right. So if I'm telling you that I'm going to log off at 5, and that's really important to me because of this, what are you worried about? Right. And they might say, well, what if an emergency comes up? Right. And then you can problem solve with them. Well, you have my cell phone, feel free to text me. Right. Doesn't mean I'm not available. It means I'm not online. Right. So there's usually something underneath of that causes that pushback. But when we start to set boundaries with people in relationships, it's really inconvenient for them. And it's probably inconvenient for them because they've been taking advantage of you, which is why we need the boundary in the first place. Yeah. Good. What else is on your mind? Anything else? We have some clear next steps. Yep. All right. Awesome.
Yeah, you left everybody speechless, Stephanie. That was great. I'm feeling energized. I don't know about you guys. Usually on a Friday afternoon, I'm just like slugging along, waiting for the weekend. But I feel good. This was great. So
Awesome.
thank you so much. Just a reminder to everybody on some upcoming events. We have our members only chapter annual meeting happening next Wednesday, the 20th at noon. Our book club begins the following day on the 21st. We're reading the book Joyful. And then on January 28th, Columbus is hosting Cocktails and Conversations. This one is all things NCIDQ. So if you're thinking you'd like to take that test, definitely join in on that. So thanks again, Stephanie.
You bet.
For today and our planning committee. And have a great weekend, everybody. Go get yourself a journal. That's what I see in the chat.
And a nap. And a nap.
A journal and a nap. And clean your toys.
Clean the toys.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.